So Amsterdam was written and directed by David O. Russell and it stars a whole bunch of people. Stars Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, John David Washington, Chris Rock, Anya Taylor-Joy, Zoe Saldana, Mike Myers, Michael Shannon, Timothy Olyphant, Andrea Riseborough, Taylor Swift, Rami Malek, and Robert De Niro. So many people. So much wasted potential. So this movie is about three friends who meet up during World War One. They hide from the war, they recover from their injuries, they bond, they form a friendship, and they will never break that bond. They will help each other no matter what. So when two of them are accused of murder, they meet up again to kind of solve things out, clear their names, figure out what's really going on here, and this movie ensues. As you can tell by my intro, I didn't really like this movie. So I was mixed about this movie going into it because, admittedly, I think David O. Russell has made some interesting movies in the last few years, like Silver Linings Playbook, American Hustle. This movie, it didn't really interest me too much. It kind of looked like a movie that was trying to copy the success of American Hustle instead of trying to be the next movie from the director of American Hustle. And even though with this stellar cast, the cast kind of helped because there's just so many people in this movie. Admittedly, I'm not really a fan of David O. Russell as a person. Reading up some of the things about him, I won't go into it, but I don't really care for him as a person. So I kind of wanted to go in with kind of just putting that aside, kind of just review it as a movie, kind of see how I feel about it. As a movie, I think it's just sloppy. This is just a really not necessarily disastrous. I think disastrous is too strong of a word. I would say this movie is misguided. There's so many moments in this movie where I kind of looked at it and said, this would be an interesting angle to take this in. This would be an interesting storyline to cover. Instead, the movie doesn't really do that. It just kind of just meanders throughout this plot, this ridiculous plot, and it's kind of annoying at times. So, is there anything that does work? Well, the performances of Christian Bale, Margot Robbie, and John David Washington do work. Their friendship is believable, and I kind of liked seeing the three of them together. As far as the other actors go, again, there's a lot of people in this movie. Some of the standouts I thought included Rami Malek and Anya Taylor-Joy. I thought they were really good in the movie. Even Taylor Swift, surprisingly, was really good. Of all the people that are in this movie, Taylor Swift really surprised me. I thought she was she kind of made me laugh at various moments. It's not very long, but I thought she did a really good job, even with all that talent and with such low screen time. And kind of like with American Hustle, the production design and the costume designs are very well done. I thought it really evoked the period that this movie was taking place in. It was fascinating. And at times, for the first act at least, the first act is kind of funny. And then as it goes on, it gets less and less funny and gets more and more convoluted. And I just thought it just lost its way. And there is an interesting story about this when you find out what it's really about. Because the actual true story is barely in this movie. And the only thing that's really true about this movie is that Robert De Niro is playing someone who's based off a real person, except they don't use the real person's name in that movie. It doesn't really work because it doesn't really work as a true story because the movie markets itself as saying this is kind of something that actually happened. Instead, the only thing they say that actually happened is that this person was involved, except they don't say the actual person's name. And that's it. That's just not really, I don't want to say it's based off a true story. It could be inspired by something that did happen, but the movie doesn't want that. So, and again, like the whole idea of this movie, when you find out what it is about, it is interesting to look at. And again, kind of like with Don't Worry, Darling from a few years back, it's like, I kind of agree with this message. I agree that, this message is important. This is really important right now. But just because I agree with your message doesn't mean I'm going to like your movie. It's just kind of thrown in there and just kind of feels awkward in there. It just doesn't work out. And also, I didn't really care for a lot of the actors in this movie. Like, there's so many people in this movie. Again, Chris Rock, Mike Myers, Zoe Saldana. And a lot of these actors are just wasted in this movie. Chris Rock, he just says the same joke in this movie. Mike Myers, well, he tries to be funny. It just kind of fails. But hey, at least Mike Myers is still working. Michael Shannon, barely in the movie. Zoe Saldana, barely in the movie. Timothy Olyphant looks like he's having fun with his performance, but man, it did not really work out. He was just he was barely a character. He was a caricature. He just didn't. I don't even remember anything he said in that movie. I think he was just a maniacal villain in this movie. And I felt like a lot of times the movie kind of focused on the wrong thing. Like, it just, there's a subplot in the movie involving Margot Robbie and John David Washington that could be really interesting if it was explored properly. But it's kind of just thrown in through a narration that, yeah, this whole thing happened. And I'm like, don't you think you should explain that a little bit better? Oh, you're not? Okay. And also, the whole reason why this movie's called Amsterdam is honestly kind of pointless because the majority of the movie takes place in America. It just doesn't really work for me. It just, I don't understand why they called it that. It's like they mentioned it a lot. They said it was really important, but it barely plays any importance in the actual movie. It just doesn't work. And also, I didn't really like there's this whole scene towards the beginning, which I won't spoil by any means. It was one of the most tasteless, ridiculous, and surprisingly hilarious, and yet so dark and like, you'll see it you'll know when you see it. It was just so out of place. It was just looked horrible. It just seemed really offensive even. I don't know, like, I was just stunned watching that scene in the theater. It's towards the beginning of the movie. You'll know it if you see this movie. A lot of people are not seeing this movie, but if you do see this movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. And also, narration. And the narration just annoyed me. Oh my god, Christian Bale's narration. I love Christian Bale as an actor. His narration is just annoying in this movie because it starts off normal and then it just basically starts beating you over the head. It's not subtle at all. It just annoyed me by the end, and like how he wraps everything up. He's just stating everything that it's just stating the obvious. It's just not interesting to me. This is a movie that I thought could have been at least interesting, kind of funny-ish in a way, but it's just a mess. It has great names, it has some good performances and great production design, but it's just convoluted. It doesn't want to commit to this whole true story aspect. It focuses on the wrong things and thinks it's important, and there's things that could be really interesting and they're not focused on at all. It's just a disaster. I said I wouldn't call it disastrous, but I think it is kind of disastrous now that I think about it. I don't like Amsterdam very much. It's honestly something I don't really like. I'm disappointed. This was bad. It's not bad enough to the point where I'm like, oh, you should just skip this movie. But it could be worth watching if you stream it, so I'll give it 2 out of 4 stars. Stream it. So, what did you think of Amsterdam? And what's your favorite movie with a star-studded cast? Comment down below, subscribe to the channel. This is Pat. Stay safe.